All right, welcome back, everybody. As I mentioned this morning, Mr. Garska had a very last-minute absence for this morning, but we are honored and lucky to be able to have Mr. Ken Wang, Deputy Director, Cybersecurity for Critical Infrastructure, who is going to be here now as you see, he has Mr. Garska's slides and will be able to pitch hit. So welcome, Ken.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Oh, good. Yes, I can hear myself hear me. Again, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here to basically pinch hit for Mr. Garstka. And as you can see, I am not Mr. Garstka. He is way much taller, and I am way more Asian. So yes, it's a privilege to be here to speak at Defend the Airport. Cyber Warfare Directorate has long been a supporter of TAC's effort in defend the X, whether it's railroad, airport, or other events. So with that, here's the agenda. We're going to talk about risk assessment and the decision tree. Cyberspace as a fifth domain of conflict, applying decision analysis and in cyber risk assessments, and of course, Mr. Garstka. If you know Mr. Garstka, he really loves history. So if you haven't been to one of his presentations, you're going to get a lot of history. So stand by. All right. So Mr. Garstka is a operational researcher background. That's his background. He went to Stanford and got his master's in the economics of engineering systems. And the biggest part of his study in that area was decision analysis when confronted with uncertainty. So this is a very simplified decision tree that is used in the analysis. So in this case, you ask yourself, do you believe cyber threat is real or it's a hoax? If it's real, then obviously you're going to have to do something about it. Is it lethal to my terrain? Is it not lethal? And you work through this ultimately to get to the end. Am I going to put money to cyber harden and make resilient my systems, right? Am I going to invest in cybersecurity? Or do I accept the risk and invest for the future, right? So this is a simplified decision tree. Obviously, when a company or a government organization is faced with this, it is obviously more complicated. But again, this is illustrative to kind of walk through that decision analysis. Okay, cybersecurity as an element of national security. As you know, the administration has put out the Cyber Strategy for America. And where we hang our hat is Pillar 4, secure critical infrastructure. We want to cyber harden or harden America's critical infrastructure and its supply chain to include the critical infrastructure in adjacent vendors and private companies. Over on the cyber elements of national defense strategy, it also specifically cites formidable cyber defenses and also bordering cyber defenses for military and certain civilian targets. What civilian targets? Well, certainly any of the critical infrastructure that supports our installations that support our missions, right? Cyber Warfare Director is very mission focused. Now, cyber threat is a clear and present danger. If you guys don't accept that, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. All right. So, annual threat assessment, PRC, remains the top threat. They believe that the intel assessment believes that if we are in a conflict with the PRC, that they will attack our critical infrastructure to impact our decision-making, induce societal panic, and interfere with our ability to deploy our forces. Now, has anyone seen the movie Leave the World Behind? Oh, we got a couple, yeah, a few. So basically, the movie is about a young family who lives in New York and goes on a weekend vacation to Long Island. While they're on vacation, a cyber attack happens. They take out the communications, they take out GPS, and what happens, I won't tell you what the results were or the ending of the movie, that would be bad. But what happens, you see the societal panic that this is referencing, you see that captured on this film. What is happening? They basically took all those self-drive, the adversary, which remains nameless, took, for instance, all this self-driving Teslas and basically crashed them on the bridge and basically cut off a line of communications, a line of transport, right? And this was across Manhattan and the neighboring areas. So again, societal panic. And really, this whole slide talks about cyber threat. We're talking the whole spectrum of the threat, from script kiddies to cyber criminals to nation state actors. They're all out there and they're all after us. What's really concerning now is AI, because the cyber threat actors, from the script kiddie to the nation state actors, are leveraging AI. And it has become, because I'm from the War Department, I refer to it as combat multiplier for these hackers, right? The AI has enabled them to basically increase their the threat, because it increases their capability and ability to get into our systems. So, I mean, who is it? Earlier in the panel, someone was talking about script kiddies going after military targets. Does anyone remember that? I think it was the gentleman, Mr. Rodsky from the FBI. I think he was the one that mentioned that. Absolutely true. And with AI, they're able to do it much more effectively. Here's a snapshot from an OD&I publication 2 years ago. These are all the, not necessarily all. This is an attack on critical infrastructure in the United States from Iran-affiliated or pro-Russian hackers. And they attacked all the different sectors. So cyber avengers and pro-Russian activists. From the water utilities to power to, or energy, to healthcare, many sectors were hit. That was 2 years ago. So think of what's been happening now. Okay. Mr. Garstka loves this slide. I don't like it, to be honest with you. It's very complicated, but essentially what it's saying is that no longer are the cyber forces, engaging cyber forces, isolated from kinetic forces. Now you're crossing boundaries from kinetic to non-kinetic to cyber and affecting across these domains now. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that's a better way than trying to explain each block. Okay. Cyberspace is a contested domain. Again, we're looking at the advanced tier 4 cyber actors to the nascent, as we call it, script kiddies, right? And all of these are the script kiddies to criminal actors to moderate and highly capable cyber threat actors, you know, they're backed by funding from various sources. And you can see the ability and intent and I don't want to say sponsorship, but the resourcing that these organizations have are increasingly basically getting larger. They're getting more and more resources because it's basically a hacktivist or hacker for hire. So we have to be able to operate in that environment. We have to understand that not only are we there, but our adversaries are there. Script kiddies are there. Criminals are there. And we have to recognize and honor those threats. Okay, here's the history lesson. All right, some of you may have seen this before. So it's kind of a parallel because we're talking cyber as the fifth domain of conflict, right? So Sherman set the Wayback Machine for 1930s, 40s era, right? So this is an image from the Army-Navy program book for the Army-Navy game on November 29th, 1941. Right here is the caption. This is the caption. A bow on view of the USS Arizona as she plows into a huge swell. It is significant that despite claims of air enthusiasts, no battleship has yet been sunk by bombs. Okay? What happened a week later? December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The Arizona, obviously, everyone knows the Arizona itself was sunk. So what we're seeing kind of parallels that. What we're seeing with cyber as the fifth domain parallels what's happening here. And so what we have here is the construction with the keel was laid in 1914 for the Arizona. What was the threat of air power back then? Yeah, not much. Way down here. You know, we're talking like Wright brothers era. The planes could barely carry their pilots, much less any ordnance. So as we move along, though, 3 years later, the Royal Navy commissioned its first aircraft carrier, and it had biplanes carrying torpedoes. And then we move into 1921. Billy Mitchell conducted a demonstration of air power against maritime targets. Then both the US and Japan commissioned their first carriers, their second carriers. Japan had their third carrier. And Japan actually conducted a strike against Shanghai from their aircraft carriers. And then, as you can see, the progression of the aircraft carrier development. And then as a point of reference, 1940, the British bombed the Italian Navy and took out 3 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 2 destroyers with air power. Well, guess who was paying attention to that? Certainly the Japanese. And they thought, wow, wouldn't it be awesome if we could just completely tank the US fleet in the Pacific while they're sitting in port in Pearl Harbor? Boom, a year later, we had Pearl Harbor. And there's been some decisions, and we're going to go through some of these decision trees that essentially contributed to what happened at Pearl Harbor, right? If certain decisions were different, the outcomes may have changed. And this relates to how we are looking at cyber. Trust me, I'll get there. I'll get there. All right. So 1941, Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, basically told the Secretary of War at the time, based on the current geopolitical situation, if a war happens with Japan, there's possibility that the hostilities would be initiated by a surprise attack upon the fleet or the naval base at Pearl Harbor. He told the Secretary of War in January of 1941, and he prioritized his risks, what he thought were the threats to the Navy: air bombing, air torpedo, sabotage, submarine, mining, bombardment. But 1 and 2. And what are they? This is how they were talking in the building, a few miles south of here. Did that translate out to Hawaii? No, not really. Because their view of the risk was different. Because the dotted line indicates what at the time the perceived risks were. So the perceived risk of air power to surface combatants was here. They thought there's no way the Japanese are going to launch air attack against our fleet while we're in Pearl Harbor. And then, but we think they're going to try to sabotage us, right? But in actuality, we know from history, it was just the opposite, right? The threat from sabotage wasn't there, not really. But the threat to air, from air attacks, certainly was there. And the interesting thing is, I don't want to get ahead on the, here we go. So General Short, who is the commander, Hawaii Department commander, basically had 2 Army divisions, 20,000 soldiers, and 6,000 airmen. And they had several alert packages. So you had alert 1 was sabotage, alert 2 was air attack, alert 3 was invasion, right? So they believed that at the time, sabotage was the most important. So they had their thing, they had their force protection essentially set up for sabotage. So they clustered all the aircraft at like Wheeler Air Force Airfield, Army Airfield, and then brought in the soldiers to protect the aircraft. Well, against an air bombing attack, we all know what happened. Oh, they're all clustered, easy target, boom, right? So that's, essentially, their decision tree was broken because they made incorrect assumptions in the face of uncertainty. Okay? Oh, look, and here's the decision tree. And this is a decision tree for the admiral that was in charge at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Richardson assumed that US torpedoes that wouldn't work in Pearl Harbor, so when he looked at his decision tree, is the threat of torpedoes real or it's a hoax? It's real. Is it lethal in Pearl Harbor? He said no. Why did he? So because he said no, he didn't go up this decision tree to deploy torpedo nets, because torpedo nets would have stopped the torpedoes from hitting the Arizona, for example. This is the key one here. What Admiral Richardson did was he projected his own experience and his own knowledge on the Japanese. He said, well, shoot, US torpedoes are not going to work in Pearl Harbor because Pearl Harbor is too shallow. That's not going to work. So therefore, the Japanese torpedoes won't work in Pearl Harbor either. Unfortunately, the Japanese torpedoes, the Japanese made modifications to their torpedoes so that they would work in shallow water and was able to be deployed and used in the constraints of Pearl Harbor itself, leading to obviously sinking and the destruction of a good portion of the Pacific Fleet. Now, I'm going to bring you from the past closer to, well, it's still the past, just not as far, right? Now we're in the 80s, right? This is Mr. Garstka. He was actually involved with Millstar. He was a young junior officer out in the LA Air Force Base, the Space Systems Command, I think it's the Air Force Base or Space Force Space Systems Command. And he was part of the Millstar program. Again, what was the threat of cyber actors to satellites back in 1981? Well, I mean, not that great, right? So this was a development. The first satellite went up in 1994. Again, the threat was still low. Who's going to hack a satellite? No. Then in 2009, NASA satellites started getting hacked. And then, as you can see, the capability of cyber actors quickly went up. And soon, of course, remember, when it was launched, the original lifespan for the satellite was 10 years. So 1994, 2004, 27 years after the program was developed, we started seeing satellites being tagged. Millstar's still up there and running, still supporting, even though now it is vulnerable because the capabilities of our adversaries have significantly increased to the point where essentially Millstar is threatened. And I'll leave it at that. And that includes our global positioning systems, GPS. Okay, so that was kind of the history. And, oh, I'm sorry, I'll go back one. Does this curve look familiar? Looks an awful lot like the battleship curve, right? So the battleship curve was the new domain of conflict was air. The new domain of conflict for this one is cyber. So you're seeing that basically that S curve hitting us in the late 2010s, right? Okay, so Cyber Warfare Directorate. This is how we look at cyber risk emission. This is the NIST 839 kind of strategic risk. We translated this to a Department of War version where we look at the mission stack. And this is the lens on which we use to look at it. All of these things, the organizations like the COCOMs have missions. Those missions are supported or conducted with weapon systems and platforms. And those weapon systems and platforms are basically interconnected through the fabric of the DOW networks. And then everything above is supported by installation critical infrastructure or DoD-owned critical infrastructure, supported by commercial critical infrastructure. So again, non-DoD-owned critical infrastructure. Stuff outside the wire, right? That's the lens. Everything down here supports everything above. Everything above depends on everything below. Right. So we took that mission stack and we translated it to an installation or a facility, right? This could be a weapon system, a platform. It could be, when we talk about supply chain risk, this could be a production facility for critical munitions, right? All of these are supported by stuff that's on the base or on the facility, and then supported by utilities outside the wire. And when we look at the diagram, we can, at any one of these points, we can impact the operations here. For example, if we're looking at a satellite ground station, what do you think will happen if we shut off the power? well, pretty much anything for DoD or DOW. If we shut off the power, we have to rely on backup generators if they're there, right? Okay. And then how long does that backup generator last? You're shaking your head. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So what we did was, and then it gets even more convoluted. And we chose Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and Honolulu International Airport. Now, we look at the airport, who owns what becomes the question. Who is responsible for what? And as we did this assessment on Pearl Harbor, it became very convoluted because the FAA owns a piece of it, Hawaii owns a piece of it, Hickam owns a piece of it, Pearl Harbor owns a piece of it. So what you're finding out is it's not a simple diagram like this. It's much more convoluted, and there's multiple owners and folks or organizations responsible for different parts of it. But in essence, it is very, abstractly, it's similar to the previous slide. But it's very, because of the different responsibilities, the ability to get after cyber vulnerabilities and mitigate those threats becomes a challenge. Who owns it? Who's going to pay for it? Right? So this is one of the challenges that we've identified as a result of our assessment of Pearl Harbor. I mean, Honolulu International, see, I can't even get it right. Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam and Honolulu International. Okay, now, when we assess cyber risk to mission, we also have to be able to explain it to senior leadership. So you have to be able to quantify and explain. So in this case, what we're showing is, here is a bunch of events happening over a timeline. You have a threat event. These are the impacts or mission capabilities. There's a threshold where there's a minimum mission capability. Anything below that, you're not mission capable. You must be able to quantify that and show that on a risk matrix. This is how the warfighter talks. This is how they understand. This is the likelihood of it happening, and these are the consequences. If it's very likely to happen and the consequences are very high, your risk is very high. So that's where you need to be able to translate that risk to your leadership so that they understand, and then they're able to, again, going back to the title slide, or not the title slide, but basically helping to inform and educate the leadership in order for them to advocate for mitigation resources. All right, and here's some real world examples. I'll start with the blocks in blue, which are basically blue on blue engagements, where in this case it was bad management, bad configuration management, a bad update. So this one, everyone's heard of, the CrowdStrike, right? They did the software update and then everything went blue. Sorry, I don't know. Has anyone done that in a briefing? I don't know. I'll be the first. So, and then the second one is FAA NOTAMs. It was a system misconfiguration that essentially brought down 1,300 flights, over 1,300 flights, ground stop, okay? But the CrowdStrike one, 50,000 flights. I think every single flight that Delta had was grounded because of it. Yeah, it was a sad day. It could only have been worse if it was Thanksgiving or Christmas. Okay, but again, it affected all of these different things. And how, so the red ones are what actually happened and its impact to the various transportation modes for DoD, from the seaports to rail transportation, and we hit they hit communications, wastewater, and telecom. So, all right. So these are real world degradations. Again, the incident 2, it was the NOTAMs that I showed earlier. For us, it impacted the ground stop, obviously, 1,300 flights canceled, 10,000 flights delayed. The incident number 1 was basically a subcontractor, Jepson's NOTAM management tool. They support Omni Air that supports Transcom, and their system got hacked. And what it caused, it basically caused the system to go offline for 14 hours, and it impacted about 1,100 military civilian passengers. That was a real world effect. Okay, this is the economics of cybersecurity. Mr. Garstka loves this slide. And what basically it tries to explain is that through this, and this was developed by Rand for Mr. Garstka, and what it's trying to say is that there's a security target based on your capabilities and the expertise. There's targets you want to meet. There is security posture that you are trying to get to, but there's a cost to it, right? That said cost needs to be borne or needs to be approved, the additional cost, by leadership. Here's what you start with. Here's your revenue and budget, your motivation. You're trying, or in this case, Mr. Garstka is trying to say, his job is to motivate his leadership to understand and basically add resources to the security budget for cybersecurity. And you're able to do that when you can quantify your cyber risk posture. Okay? This is all about understanding the risk, quantifying the risk, translating that risk, informing and educating your leadership of that risk in order to move resources to get after mitigations of those risks. So this is kind of a view of the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. Looking at companies, nation state actors, really not within the CEO's fiduciary responsibilities. And I would argue maybe they could be from a reputational perspective. But within the CEO's fiduciary responsibilities, you're talking insiders, script kiddies, criminals, people looking for a payout, right? This is people looking for some other effect, right? And here's what really is the telling piece. Cyber insurers will cover criminal and cyber kiddies, but they will not cover nation state actors. That's very important. Okay, again, assessing risk to airport operations. Here's a notional example where we took the risk matrix, again, how the warfighters talk, and how you may talk to senior leadership, whether it's at the FAA or TSA or the leadership at the airport. But here's the potential impacts of the cyber attack, the likelihood and the consequence. So in this diagram, at least for the airport's perspective, given the fact that you're looking at cyber pirates, number 3 is the one that you want to get after first, right? Because we're just looking at, the stuff here is the ones that are more likely and more consequential. So we want to make sure we get after those first. But again, we have to balance that between how much it's going to cost, right? So that's where you need to be able to explain that risk to leadership in order for them to advocate for those resources. Again, the bang box there, quantifying cyber risk is critical. You have to be able to show them why it's important that they invest resources in the mitigations. Okay, ooh, 5 minutes over. Not bad. So in summary, cyber threats to commercial critical infrastructure are significant. I think we said that. Nobody got up and left when I asked if everybody believed that. So quantifying cyber risk is key to resourcing risk mitigations, right? You have to be able to quantify it, you have to be able to explain it, and you have to be able to show it and translate it to a warfighter for them to understand why they need to spend money to get after fixing these things. And you need money to fix it. I mean, that's bottom line. We have to honor the threat posed by our adversaries and criminals to our commercial critical infrastructure. With that, final thing, cyberspace is the fifth domain of conflict. It is the new domain. There are believers out there and there are non-believers out there. They're still transitioning. So it's almost like that program. We're at the part where the Army Navy game program comes out, right? We still have non-believers out there, but we're getting there, right? I do have a few minutes for questions. I'll go ahead and open up the floor. Anyone, and for those folks online, please, I guess, put that in chat, and Alexis will get that to me. And I'll answer the best I can. I'll do my best John Garstka impression. Yes. Well,
Second.
we're going to mic you up.
Who raised? Oh, Brian.
Thanks. Hey, Ken.
Hey.
Hey, so my organization working with John and you, how much interaction do you guys have with the Cyber Innovation Warfare Center, which, as I understand it, is supposed to be a doorway for Cyber Command to get technologies into this space so that as the fifth domain of conflict, we can actually move at scale?
So, with the Cyber Warfare Directorate does work with the Innovation Center. I know that the Cyber Operations Portfolio Management under Mr. Garstka and the Deputy Director, Jay Graham, provides oversight for JICWA and other cyber capability development. So that would kind of fall within their purview, but I think they're tied in pretty closely with the Innovation Center and certainly with Cybercom as they execute their acquisition authorities.
Because I think this group and how they can contribute to bringing full spectrum cyber capabilities at scale to the department.
Sure. Go ahead. Rob?
Hold on.
He's my boss. Let's chat after this.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of what I mean by being able to move resources to get after mitigations, Mr. Garstka and his team has in 24 moved 250 million to get after mitigations. In 26, we moved almost 500 million in resources to get after mitigations. So you can do it. You can do it. You just got to be able to quantify your risk to get that resourcing. Sorry, go ahead. You had a question?
Hi, yeah, Jeff Olstead. Thanks very much for the presentation. And the Pearl Harbor analogy is one that is close to heart here. Yesterday, we had a couple discussions around the FCC router mandate and the what's deemed to be a critical national security threat posed by the infiltration of foreign routers into our networking infrastructure. There was a camp, shall we say, that feels that that's not significant, that routers are just a part I advocate that routers might be considered to be critical infrastructure given their significance. But
Telecom, yeah.
I think they're both right that actually, you know, the way to think about it more is that routers are a part that's distributed widely as part of a campaign by the PRC called TP-Link and other vectors to infiltrate our, you know, it's a set up an attack platform. So I guess my question for you is, when I look at that risk assessment, right, I feel like it, you know, it almost sounds exactly like the torpedoes at Pearl Harbor, like people saying, well, that's not a big risk when it's actually right there in front of us. And then the consequences of that risk in terms of societal and economic disruption being underestimated. And I'd just be curious about your thoughts on that.
So I have a unique point of view because one of the other portfolios that I'm responsible for is cyber supply chain risk management. So as that part where we're looking at the routers, it's not just the FCC, it's the entire federal government. And there's different organizations, for instance, the Federal Acquisition Security Council is looking at it, along with the War Department. You know, we're looking at these things and we're trying to assess the risk. But like you said, it is interdispersed into our communication systems and our telecommunication systems. And because that stuff is outside the wire, we have to work with the other federal agencies in order to get after that. But we are working. We do recognize that there is an issue. But again, sometimes it's hard. You know, with the federal government, sometimes it's hard to get things moving, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Ken, we have a question online.
Yes.
What is your recommendation to show business risk in a quantifiable way? If I show these charts in the presentation, it can come across as fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and not tangible for business management.
Well, you have to translate that risk because you're talking business. So you need to translate to money, lost revenue.
Yeah.
That's how you have to explain it. You know, because of this, for instance, I talked about the production line in that diagram, right? So if cyber threat actors can get into the IT portion of my business, and that business is hooked up to the OT portion on my production floor, and they're able to hack in, you can quantify that risk and show, because of that, you have X amount of hours or days your production line is going to be down. And that equates to X millions of dollars lost in revenue. When you're talking millions of dollars in revenue, the eyes light up and they're basically, pardon the expression, the oh shit meter goes, and suddenly you'll get movement when you talk revenue.
Oh.
I hope that answered the question.
Mr. Fisher?
Sorry, look at me. I made a noise. Now I cursed on the briefing. And it's recorded. And there's 300 people online watching this.
Hey,
So
thank
awesome.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate it. I'm Spencer Fisher. I'm the Chief Counsel at CISA. I'm also a Marine Reservist assigned to 3MEF in Okinawa. I wanted to ask you because I think your first slide with the ATA mentions the link between, for instance, a kinetic attack on Taiwan with an attack on our critical infrastructure. Do you feel like that message is getting through, meaning your calculation, I think, on the cyber risk depends on people taking an actual threat to critical infrastructure seriously, even in the event of, let's say, a 2027 or 2028 attack on Taiwan. Is there enough buy-in, in your opinion, in the building you work in the private industry folks you work with, that will happen? Meaning a kinetic attack on Taiwan will result on water, airport, infrastructure attacks, such that you can get the buy-in for your last couple slides for people to actually appreciate the risk. Over.
So my short answer will always be there's not enough buy-in, period, by anyone, right? Because people, and when I say people in general, do not understand the mission dependencies of all of this, right? And the strategic dependencies from that mission stack I showed you. How, when you start linking things up and realizing, hey, if I took this component out of this power substation that is feeding a radar station that feeds into the integrated air missile defense, which is protecting the country from ballistic missiles or hypersonics, you need to be able to make that dependency, walk through that dependency linkage and quantify the risk at every point. And then be able to come with an overall risk and say, your mission is basically at risk. And being able to explain that. And the buy-in for critical infrastructure is still, it's getting better, but it can always be better, right? People are starting to understand. Not my office, Mr. Garska's office is one of the big champions within the department to try to get that, inform and educate our leadership on that. So that they understand that, yes, your nice shiny objects, that's what I call them, F-22, F-35, all these different weapon systems. Yeah, and I like to pick on the aircraft because they're easier. If I hit your power to your base, or I hit the fueling system to the tarmac, those nice shiny objects are basically static displays. They're not going anywhere. If they're not flying, they're not accomplishing their mission. So that's the kind of, that linkage that needs to be made. And that's one of the things that we did. We worked with Air Force to get their leadership to understand. This is, I'll give you a case example, that we said, hey, we took out your fuel system on base. Now you have to manually fuel the planes with the trucks. When we did the analysis with Air Force, here's the translation to the warfighter. I've degraded your sortie generation rate by 40%. So basically, if you had 100 flights planned for the day to accomplish the mission, you just lost 40 of those. So that's the impact that the warfighters understand. Oh crap, I almost lost half of my ability to conduct the mission. That's when you get the money to start moving. So you have to be able to tell the story. As Mr. Garstka said, it's all about the narrative. Got to tell the story. Got to be able to back it up with data and quantify the risk. So any other questions? I think I'm out of time.
I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you so much, Ken. That was terrific. Much appreciated.